Okay, why don't we get started here, and I will try to let any stragglers in as they show up. We had about, it's great to see everybody here and on all the names on the list. We had about 40 or 50 people register for the webinar, and I'm guessing a smaller number will attend live. We're going to send out the recording afterwards to everybody who's here in person and everybody who registered who wants to watch it later. But first, I just want to say thank you for jumping on to learn more about Wholesum. Hopefully it can help you streamline some of your menu planning. Got a few more folks jumping on now. And I just wanted to, I'll do my best to keep this brief and make time for any questions that you all have, and to run through scenarios and deal with some of the sticking points if there are. I looked through the list of registrants, and it's a pretty healthy mix. We've got people from university outdoor programs, from summer camps, professional outfitters, and a variety of, there's some bed and breakfast and ranch folks on as well. And it's great to see that diversity and to know that Wholesum can help in that variety of ways. I thought before we jump in, maybe if you're willing to just open up the chat box and introduce yourself, what your industry is, where you're calling in from, and if there's any other things you'd like to share about questions or concerns, challenges you have with Wholesum. If you want to take a minute to type that into the chat, and we can all introduce ourselves, and then I'll jump straight into the presentation here. I should say too, I saw that there's a handful of existing Wholesum customers that are on here as well, which is always exciting to see. So we can do a little deep dive. Great. Some fellow Rocky Mountain folks out here. Myself, I'm calling in from Missoula, Montana. Wow, great. Welcome, Jess, that's great. Perfect. Great, thank you all for chiming in, and it looks like we've got a fun mix of folks on here. So I'm sharing my screen right now. I hope you all can see it. Let me know if that's not the case. And what I'm hoping to do here is give a quick overview of what we're going to do today, and then I'll start sharing my screen and actually jump into Wholesum so that you can get a sense of how it all works. My quick overview, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wholesum, how it came to be. I wanted to actually start, I don't usually do this, but I wanted to start with some recipe ideas to just show you a platform, so that even if you decide that Wholesum might not be the right tool for you, you can, if there's nothing else you walk away with, you can hop onto this platform that's totally free to browse through some ideas that might help you with your groups. And then I sort of wanted to break this into 3 quick sections. One is just a really quick summary of the tool so that you get a sense of how it works in a general way. It's with all the bells and whistles turned off, it's a pretty straightforward tool that you can start exploring. I wanted to spend a bit of time talking just about dietary restrictions. I know that that's one of the most challenging areas that we're all wrestling with in terms of feeding groups. And then I wanted to end with a little bit more conversation, time permitting, about some of the more advanced features about dealing with multiple groups at the same time, or customizing your exports, multiple users, those sorts of things. And then obviously we'll take time to talk about how to sign up, the trials and the pricing and whatnot. I'll make sure that after each one of these sections, we have a little bit of time for questions. If at any point you have questions that pop up while I'm chatting with you, or you want me to repeat something or go through it more slowly, feel free to drop that in the chat box, and then we'll have some time at the end to have some more conversation if there are ongoing questions. So with that, let me move this out of the way and we'll open up Wholesum. Can you all see that? Can I get a yes in the chat box if you're able to see this? Okay. Great, perfect. So this is Wholesum. As I mentioned, I wanted to jump to, before I start introducing the tool, I wanted to introduce one little thing that we rolled out a few years ago, which is down here in the bottom, this recipe collections. And I wanted to share this just up front so that if you are just looking for ideas and you don't necessarily need the tool. This is something you can walk away with. It's free. You don't need to sign up for an account to view it. But we had a handful of current Wholesum users reach out over the past year or two offering to share their recipes on this platform. And so if you're ever looking for somebody else that's in, if you're a whitewater outfitter and want to see what other whitewater outfitters are serving, or if you're a university outdoor program and want to see what other universities are doing, we have a handful of organizations on here, and you can jump into these recipes and just get a sense of what they look like. We'll explore how to import these into your own Wholesum account as well, if that's something you're interested in. But if you're just looking for ideas, you can always come here and see what your options are. So setting that aside, I wanted to actually introduce the tool here. So this is Wholesum. When you log in, when you sign up for a trial or sign up for an account, this is what you'll see. And apologies in advance for any current users of Wholesum. This first section will probably be a review for you. But this is what you'll see. We're going to spend most of our time talking about this top row: recipes, ingredients, and meal plans. And those are the three main components of Wholesum. You'll spend most of your time here in the meal plan section. So recipes and ingredients, this is really setup, kind of getting your recipes dialed in, dialing in the ingredients in terms of where you purchase the ingredient, how much it costs, any notes you want to take. So we'll visit each of those. But I wanted to actually start here at the end, which is the meal plans section, so that you get a sense of where we're going with this platform and what the output potential is. And then we can jump back and look at our recipes and ingredients so that you can get a sense of how to dial it all in. So let me start here with meal plans. This is my fake account. These are all meal plans that I've created in the past. I've got some folders to organize them. These are basically our groups. So if you're an outfitter and you have a group of 15 people coming, these are those groups that we can plan for. If you're a camp and this is a week-long food session, same thing. So I'm going to just start by creating a new meal plan, and then we'll go back here and play with it some more. So let me say webinar demo meal plan. So this is our group name. We're going to add the number of people here. Let's say we've got 20 individuals. You can do that by appetite size if you'd like. And then we just flag which dietary restrictions are present in the group. I'll dive into this a little bit more thoroughly here in the dietary restriction section today. This is the most simple way to manage it, but there's a more advanced way that allows for a lot more automatic substitutions and things like that. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And then this is our meal planning process. So we're going to say we've got a 3-day group: breakfast, lunch, dinner, and a snack. On the left, you'll see all of the recipes, and I'll share more about that in a minute. These are all ones that I've preloaded in there. And what we'll do is just drag and drop a few of these in there to build out the meal plan that we're going to serve to this group. Again, these are all sort of dummy recipes that I've entered myself. You'll have an opportunity once you get in there with the trial to create your own recipes and enter them either manually or import them. And then this is our meal plan that we've entered, these meals. You'll see the dietary restrictions flagged here. You'll see some of the ingredients that are in each recipe. And then the last step here is basically, these are the meals that we've added, and it's saying, it's indicating that there's everyone in the group is eating each one of those. And if that's not true, we can scale it back. If for some reason somebody's coming late or somebody's leaving early, that's how we can accommodate that. So that's creating the meal plan. I can show you what this is, the final output. There's a few ways to see it. There's an Excel spreadsheet. You can look at it here on the screen. I usually gravitate towards the PDF. So let's take a look at that just to see the final output. And then we'll dive more into what went into making this. So the final output here is a shopping list. This will be scaled up to the group size. You'll see that it'll aggregate across different recipes. So we've got this many eggs needed for these 2 meals. If you've taken the time to enter what store you purchase it at or what department you buy it from, it will sort by store and by department. And you can pull in different notes or different ways of measuring these volumes. So that's our shopping list. This is a copy of the meal plan that you can pin up on the wall or send out in the field, depending on the work that you do. And then finally, it will give us the actual recipes with the instructions if we've added them, as well as the recipe-specific ingredients that are needed to cook for that group size. So this is what bacon and eggs would look like for 20 people. So that's a really quick demo of sort of the end product. And I wanted to back up a little bit to just show you a quick introduction to the recipes and the ingredient section, so you have a sense of the upfront work that it'll take to get to that final output. So with that, I'm going to come back home. That was the meal plans I just showed you. Let's take a look at our recipes. This is a really straightforward piece here. You can see that you can create them manually or import them from those collections that I showed you, or allrecipes.com. If you have a pretty dialed in set of recipes, I usually suggest creating them manually. It takes a little bit more time to do that, but what you end up with is more precision in terms of the naming convention of the ingredients and the units that you use. It's really important that you have control over those things. So making them manual is often recommended, even though it's a little bit more time intensive. So this is a recipe, a simple one, bagels and cream cheese. It's a servings of 10 people. We're going to say 10 bagels and 1 tub of cream cheese. It's a really straightforward recipe that I just wanted to give an example of something simple that you can do. The quantities here don't particularly matter as long as they match the ingredient quantities. So if you are working in an operation where you think of your recipes already in terms of per person quantities, you can change this to 1 whole bagel and 1/10 of a tub of cream cheese. The end result will be the same because it will scale up and scale down later in the process when you work with your meal plans. So we'll leave it at 10 and 1 just to go back to where it was. And then you can add some additional pieces here if you'd like to. This is where you can flag what dietary restrictions might be problematic in this recipe. You can add instructions if it's a more complicated recipe that you want your cooks or your guides or instructors to go out and have some instructions for how to cook it. You can do that. You can flag it by meal category. This allows you to filter those recipes when you're creating the meal plan. And then if you want to, you can also tag this recipe with something custom. So if your business operation has you doing different kinds of recipes for different kinds of operations, you can tag them for those so that you can quickly zoom in on the recipes that you want to look at there. So I'll save that. That's basically the recipe list. I'll be revisiting this here in a little bit. You can clone them if you want to make a vegetarian version of a recipe or a slight modification of that recipe so that you don't have to start over. And you can filter them by tags and categories like we talked about. So that's recipes. And then the last piece I wanted to show you before we pause and start digging into some dietary restrictions and other things are the ingredients here. So as you build out your recipes, this list will automatically be created of all of the ingredients in all of your recipes. And so in this case, I made that bagels and cream cheese recipe, and it added bagels to this list. I've added a note to not buy onion bagels. So this is a place where you can give some instruction to the person who's doing the purchasing or the packing to say, here's the brand that we want to do, or make sure that you buy organic, or check the inventory before you go out and purchase this. You can add some notes here for those ingredients. You can specify the store where you purchase it, as well as the department where it's found. And the idea here is that the final shopping list will be sorted by the store and sorted by the department so that you can really streamline your shopping and go from there. I missed a question here that said, are you able to save the meal plan you create as a template so that you can easily repeat it? Yes, you can. I'll show you that here in just a second. I'll jump back to that. And we see that a lot of organizations do that so that you don't have to start from scratch with each meal plan. So lastly is the cost. If you wanted to track the cost estimates, this is a good place to do that. You can put in the purchase quantity and the purchase price, and this will roll up to show you the cost per meal, the cost per group, and that sort of thing. It's less about an accounting practice in terms of reporting, but more just getting you some estimates for which recipes and which groups are going to be more expensive. So those are the three main components. In response to that question from Lucas, let me just jump back to the meal plans here. And you'll see this webinar demo is the one that I created a moment ago. And there's a clone version here. So what you could do is create a template, have a templates folder, for example, that you can just drag that into. And then when you wanted to make a new group that was similar to that template, we can just click clone, and now we have a new one that we can turn on to edit and adjust different volumes of people or change the meals from there. I hope that answers your questions. So with that, I wanted to just pause there. That was me running through the basic recipe creation, ingredient management, and creating menus and shopping lists. I haven't shown you any of the fancy tools that will do some more automatic calculations and make things easier. If you have a pretty simple operation with not too many dietary restriction challenges or not too many complicated groups, that may be all that you need. That's the sort of most straightforward version of Wholesum. And I wanted to just pause there for a moment to see if there are any questions. You're welcome to type them into the chat window, or you can unmute your microphone if you like. It's a small enough group that I think we can have some more conversation too. And if not, I'll move on and we can talk about dietary restrictions a bit. Just give it a minute in case somebody's typing. Okay, we'll move on to dietary restrictions. So dietary restrictions, this is one of the most challenging things that I think organizations are facing with their groups. And every year it seems to be getting more and more complicated to manage dietary restrictions for groups. And so I wanted to make sure that we took some time today to just talk about the different ways that we can manage dietary restrictions in general, but also how Wholesum can be adapted to deal with those things. So just as a quick background, I generally view this as there being sort of three different ways to manage dietary restrictions. And you're probably doing one of those three ways or two of those three ways already. But it's helpful to think about in terms of how we adapt those to Wholesum. So very quickly, the three that jump to mind for me, and feel free to chime in if you have other ideas or thoughts on the chat. The three that jump out to me are, one, sort of like the lowest common denominator way of doing this. And so a version of that would be, if we have a vegetarian in this group, the whole group is going to eat vegetarian. We're just going to not try to accommodate that person. We're going to bring everything down to the lowest common denominator and make sure every meal is meeting everyone's dietary restrictions. So that's one strategy that isn't really a crowd pleaser, but is one way to work through this. The second way is to do meal substitutions. So an example of that would be, for example, we're going to have pasta tonight for dinner, but Joe can't eat gluten, and so we're going to, for him, cook this different meal. We're going to cook rice and beans or something without gluten for him. So everybody else is eating pasta, but we're cooking a completely separate meal for those people that are vegetarian or those people that are gluten-free. So that's another strategy that a lot of organizations use. And then the last one, which I think is probably the most common, is what I usually call ingredient substitution. So we might be eating pasta, and we're going to make sure we cook some gluten-free pasta for Joe, who can't have gluten, or we're going to have a vegetarian sauce for those that don't eat meat. And so everybody's eating the same meal. There are just some ingredients in that meal that we're going to substitute based on the dietary restrictions. So I wanted to start with that last one. I think that's the most common practice that most organizations are trying to move toward to manage dietary restrictions. And we've built in a tool to do that. So let's take a look at that. I wanted to first jump into these settings, and we won't go through all of these, but these are sort of all of the components that we could talk about ways that you could improve your managing of food for groups. And I'm just going to turn on the substitute ingredients function so that we can see what that does. And I will jump to bagels and cream cheese, that recipe that we were working on. And now that I've turned on the substitution, the ingredient substitutions, I now have this substitute column. And what this does is, as I'm building the recipe, I can set up some rules and say, for bagels, if somebody is not going to have wheat or gluten, we're going to substitute 10 whole bagels for 10 whole gluten-free bagels. Now, this won't substitute it for the whole group. It'll substitute it just for those individuals that have a gluten intolerance. So we're setting up that rule there. And similarly for cream cheese, if somebody doesn't have dairy, we're going to substitute the tub of cream cheese for a jar of peanut butter. So that we'll go through each recipe and set up those rules to manage those dietary restrictions. It takes a little bit more time to set up the recipes, but it'll save a lot of time and a lot of food waste on the back end, hopefully. And now when I jump to the meal plans again, I'll come in and edit that webinar demo meal plan that I just made. And you'll see that instead of just checkboxes here, we now have sliders. So we can say we've got 5 people who don't do wheat or gluten, and we've got 8 people that don't do dairy. And as we slide these up, it's going to reference those rules and substitute in a few more gluten-free bagels or a little bit more peanut butter to make sure that that recipe is ready to accommodate whatever dietary restrictions were outlined in the recipe. And I'll show you what that looks like quickly. So if I click Save Now, and I'll go back to that PDF. You'll see the dietary restrictions outlined up here. And then if I jump to the recipe, bagels and cream cheese, you'll see now, oops, there we go. You'll see that it's outlined the number of bagels and the number of gluten-free bagels, which is a substitute for bagels, and similar with cream cheese and peanut butter here. So that way, this is a really great way for you to manage dietary restrictions without having to really think through each one. Once you've set up those rules in the recipes, Wholesum sort of does the math to auto-calculate the substitutions that you'll need for any given group. I'll say one more thing on that note, which is that if you ever needed to, you can edit the dietary restrictions too. It'll come preloaded with this list for you. But if for some reason you wanted to add more options to deal with, this is where you could do that as well. So maybe I'll pause there as well. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat or feel free to unmute your microphone and I can go through that again or answer.
John, do you mind showing the custom dietary restrictions process?
Yeah, sure. So you mean in terms of adding?
Yeah, like I tend to have students who can't do sesame, and I can't remember if that was on your list, or like specific nuts rather than every single nut.
Yeah, I hear that one fairly often. So as an example, I've got nuts here. If you wanted to add different nuts in there, we could call this peanuts. I'm sorry. And then we would basically add in, tree nuts versus peanuts as an example. And when I add that in, it will show up in all of the recipes and show up on the meal plans in the same way that the rest of them will. Does that make sense?
Will it know what tree nuts are? Like, will it associate like the word almond with the category of tree nuts, or? It
won't automatically do that, but as you come in to define those rules, you'll set up you'll say this ingredient has tree nuts in it, and so we're going to if somebody is allergic to tree nuts, we'll substitute it for this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Thanks.
Yeah,
no
I problem.
think so. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Other questions out there? Okay, great. So I wanted to just show you the very quickly the one other way of managing dietary restrictions that we talked about, which is that meal substitution. And we talked about this a little bit already, but as an example, I will come in here and let's say we're going to do, I'll add that back. We're going to do pesto pasta with chicken for this dinner. And we wanted to do a meal substitution. So for somebody who's vegetarian or somebody who is gluten-free, we're actually going to serve a completely different meal. So we're not just substituting gluten-free pasta or vegetarian protein. We're going to do a completely different meal and add rice and beans here. And the way we would manage this is down here to say, well, 10 people are going to have the pesto pasta and the other 5 will have this. So it's just it's just a way of indicating how many people are eating each meal. So if you'd rather do it that way, that's another way you can do it. A lot of organizations, if they're not interested in setting up the substitution rules, will just have vegetarian or gluten-free meal options that they add to the group and then do the adjustments here. So that's another way to do it. You'll also notice up here in the recipes list that you can filter these down. So if you wanted to just completely get rid of anything with wheat or gluten, we can say, just show me the recipes that don't have wheat or gluten in them. So as long as you've checked that box in the recipe, it will filter it away so that you can work with a smaller list. This is a good option for those that are really severe. So for example, if you've got somebody in your group that's got a peanut allergy and you want to completely avoid that, you can say, just show the recipes that don't have these nuts and tree nuts, and then you can avoid those recipes entirely. So that's another way that it'll help you. You can also filter these, as I mentioned, by those tags or categories that I put on there. Great. So unless there are other questions, that covers the dietary restrictions piece. And then I wanted to take just a few minutes to talk through a few of the more advanced Wholesum tools or additional tools that not everybody is going to need, but if it helps in your business practices, you might find it helpful for you. So I'll spend a little bit of time on just sort of customizing the export so that it can match what you want to see for your shopping or your packing. And then if there are questions about these other features, we can spend time on those, and otherwise we'll jump into the pricing and options. So on the export front, let's, before I jump to settings, I wanted to show one other thing here, which is that if you're an organization that has these multiple groups coming, but maybe we have 3 groups coming next week, and you have shopping lists for each of those 3 groups, if your process is that you actually shop for all of the groups at once, but then you'll separate the ingredients out for each group or pack them up separately, this button here will allow you to shop for multiple groups at once. So rather than just pulling that webinar demo meal plan, we can aggregate all of these together, and it'll show you a shopping list for all of those groups combined, so that you don't have to bring 3 different shopping lists to the store with you or place 3 different orders with your vendors. Similarly, you can use this to multiply it. So if this was, for example, a template meal, like was mentioned by Lucas, and your pre-season, you want to purchase all of your dry ingredients, and you don't know your specific group numbers or your specific dietary restrictions, but you're going to have 15 groups that look like this. You can use this to multiply them out and just get the larger quantity for the season to purchase in advance. So that's one helpful tool if it matches your process. And then the other one that I wanted to show you is in here called export customization, and I'm going to turn that on quickly. And now when I come back to that meal plan that we just made earlier here, you'll see that instead of a PDF and Excel button that's here, you actually have this export meal plan option, and it will show you, it'll give you a few more options. So if we wanted to pull a list just for one store, we could pull the shopping list just for that store. or if we wanted to just pull all of the bulk and dry goods that we wanted to do, we can just pull the bulk list from there. This is also true on that export list button. So you could pull a bulk shopping list from Costco for 5 groups at once, and you can combine and adjust them in that way. So it's a little bit more powerful of a tool in case the standard shopping list that I showed you here doesn't quite do the trick for you. If you want more precision or to combine groups or just focusing on one store, that's a really great tool to use as well. So why don't I pause there again? Any other questions out there, either in the chat, or feel free to unmute your microphone. Okay. Carly had a question. When you aggregate multiple meal plans, are you able to separate by specific store? Yes, you are. So when that export customization is turned on, if I came back to that place where I aggregate them, you'll see the same thing here. So I could check off the boxes that the groups that I wanted to shop for, and then just pick my store and then pull the PDF or Excel spreadsheet for the shopping list. Good question. Any other ones out there? Okay. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I just wanted to come here back to the settings area just to point out what is out there. And if you have specific questions now or at another time, I can dig into each of these in more detail. So these are places where you can just refine Wholesum a little bit more to meet your needs. So you can define which columns show up in the spreadsheets. You can sort and adjust different ways of viewing the PDFs, how they break pages and things like that. If ingredient rounding, this is one where you may have seen on one of those shopping lists that sometimes if you build the recipes in a way that sort of conflicts with the group numbers that you have, you'll get these decimal points, which may not make sense. And if that's problematic for your operations, if it gets too confusing, you can set up rounding rules for those ingredients, and I'm happy to talk through that. Packing notes allow you to get a little bit more detail at the recipe level for where notes about each ingredient. Batch recipes is a really interesting one that allows you to use recipes that don't really scale linearly, and I can talk through that some more, but that's more, I often use the example of a cake, where you're not going to make a cake and a half, you're just going to make 1 cake or 2 cakes. And this allows you to scale by doubling rather than scaling incrementally. And I can talk more about that if anybody's interested. And then multiple users is a good one. If you've got a big team of lots of people coming into Wholesum, you can set up some permissions to make sure that nobody's tinkering with your recipes, but they're allowed to create or edit meal plans. So that's, multiple users aren't necessary. You can have lots of people logging into Wholesum at once using one login. You don't need to buy multiple licenses, but if you wanted people to have different permissions, that's a good tool for you to use as well. So feel free to call it out in the chat or on audio if there's any of those that you want me to dive into now. Otherwise, I'm always happy to set up a call to walk through it for your specific operations. And there's also some help and support articles and videos that will walk through them on the website. So the last thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about a bit was the different ways of subscribing. So first of all, there's a 14-day free trial that doesn't require a credit card or anything like that. You can sign up with just your email address and play with it for free for 2 weeks. And then there are different levels here. Most organizations land in the professional or enterprise. Unless you've got a really simple, straightforward operation, then basic should work for you. And you can see which ones of these are available at each level that we talked about. And then you also have the option of monthly versus annual. And so annual will obviously renew on an annual basis. But if you're a seasonal operation and you just need it for 3 or 4 months a year, you can do a monthly plan. When you pause your account, you'll lose access to the recipes and meal plans, but they'll still be there in the background. So when you're ready in the next season to fire it up again, you can pick up where you left off. So either one of those, you can decide which level and whether monthly or annual works for you. Any other questions about the platform itself before I move on to the last piece I wanted to share with you?
We have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I was just curious, is this all on a website? Do you guys have, so our folks who are planning food for us in the summer are out in the field. They're not based in an office. So we were imagining using this like on tablets. But I'm assuming there's not an app.
Yeah, there is an app, but it might not meet the needs of your team if there's not access to internet. The tablet version of it, both iPhone and Android, an iPhone or a tablet, is mostly meant for shopping. So it's basically a digital version of this shopping list where you can go to the store and check off what's been purchased or what's been packed. And so there is an app that will connect with it, but it's not so much for the planning part where you're dragging the meals in and creating your list. It's more for the shopping piece. But that said, if they have internet access, it is a responsive website that will work on a tablet. So they'd have to hop onto any browser, and then this interface would work, including the drag and drop and everything like that should work on a mobile mobile device. It's a bit complicated to manage from a phone, from a small screen. It can be done, but it works fine on a tablet.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, no problem. Other questions or thoughts? Going once. Okay, then the last piece I just wanted to share with you was my contact information here. So if you have questions, if you dive in and you start a trial and you want to have a more customized, conversation much like this with yourself or your team, and to think through how it might work in your specific operations, don't hesitate to reach out. I've got I run individual demos all the time, and I'm happy to join. This is my phone number and my email address right here. We can find a time to connect. And lastly, just if you feel like whether this is a good fit for you, if you feel like there's somebody else out there that you think would benefit from this, please do feel free to spread the word. We're a small but growing organization trying to help organizations with their food planning as much as we can. So do appreciate you getting the word out there for us, and I appreciate you coming today. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll stick around here for a few more minutes if there are any specific questions that pop up, or if you want to dive into any of the other specific features. And beyond that, it's been great having you here. Thanks so much. Take care.
Don, I think I have another clarifying question about the food restrictions.
Yeah, sure.
So like you added the tree nuts allergy in there, and then when you filtered the recipes for no recipes that have tree nuts, like does Wholesum know what ingredients count as a tree nut?
No,
like
it won't.
It
won't automatically know that. So as you build out the recipes, you'll either define the substitutes and that will flag them, or you'll just check off tree nuts in that recipe and say, this recipe has tree nuts in it. And so that's how it ties back to that filter.
I see. Okay. So like for sesame, I would have to like create a recipe called hummus and say hummus contains sesame.
Yeah.
And then would Wholesum know that anytime hummus is listed, that includes sesame?
Anytime that recipe is used, it would. So it's done at the recipe level rather than the ingredient level. So you would say, anytime you added hummus to a recipe, you would want to check off the sesame box for that recipe.
Okay. Okay. So then if I wanted to, just avoid hummus store-bought with sesame, I would want to create like a allergen just called hummus, maybe?
That could work, or having one that's called sesame in here if it's sesame that you're trying to avoid. Having creating a dietary restriction called sesame, and then just making sure that that box is checked for every recipe that has hummus in it.
Okay.
I think that's the typical way. Much like if it was chicken, you know, and we added a recipe that had some sort of chicken in here, you know, we would then make sure that we checked off the poultry box anytime we were using it.
Got it. Yeah, I'm just thinking of like folks who might be doing the shopping who aren't aware of some of these like subtleties of allergies, like tahini is sesame.
Yeah, and that's why I think
helpful.
One of the things I try to emphasize with new folks that are getting it set up is that it really is worth taking your time to be thorough and diligent with the recipes, because the recipes is what drives the shopping list. And so if you've done a good job checking off the boxes at the recipe level, then the shopping list and all that filtering should do its trick, whether it's the substitutions or just avoiding them entirely. It's also one of the reasons why I think if you've got a lot of staff who aren't super well versed in that kind of thing, let's jump to settings, using that multiple users function so that they can't adjust the recipes is a great thing, so that they can come in and play with the meal plans and menus. But you've taken your time to check sesame in every one of those recipes, and you've taken your time to assign substitutes. And so if you've got seasonal staff or rotating staff that are using this frequently, either through training or through this multiple users piece, you want to make sure that they're not tinkering too much with the recipes.
Got it. Okay. And then for the shopping lists, there's no like automation with the different stores. Like if it wouldn't tell me, like if I select Costco, that such and such item is in this section of the store, or any, like I have to enter all that manually, right?
Yep, it's a manual entry process.
Okay. Cool. Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and those are good questions, because I think it highlights the importance of the setup time. You know, it is a project to get this off the ground in terms of getting your recipes entered, dialing them in with dietary restrictions, updating your ingredient list. It usually takes a few hours for each organization to get that up to speed. But once that's done hopefully then you can spend all your time on the meal plans and very infrequently jump back to add new recipes and whatnot.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Lindsay. Any other questions out there?
Hey, John, Lucas here. Just curious, what's on the horizon for you? Any other big add-ons or anything that you're working on?
Let's see. There's a few little ones that we're rolling out that a few organizations have requested in terms of the Excel spreadsheet. So making sure that all the fields, I didn't demo the spreadsheet here, but we are hoping to make sure that the packing notes and all the ingredient notes and those sorts of things pull through into the spreadsheet. And then there's a few other little ones, but probably not worth digging into too much. No major overhauls on the horizon. Yeah. Anything on your mind?
I was just thinking about the shopping list and any potential for like integrating with an online order with any of, a grocery store or something like that. It would be a huge time saver. I imagine there's a lot that goes into that on your end though.
Yeah, I've gotten that question a few times and it's been on my mind. It's a difficult one, in part because there's so many different vendors out there in the world, but also because the units used by organizations can be so varied between recipes and purchasing that I've had trouble wrapping my head around how to incorporate that. But it's keep asking. I'll keep chewing on it for sure.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can leave it there. I want to make sure I'm respectful of your time. I know I was trying to keep it at 45 for as many people as we could. Okay. Well, we can leave it there. Thanks again for joining, and I'll be sending out a copy of this recording here in the next day or two. And again, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or want to connect. Thanks so much. Have a good one.